really nice to see so many people here. Post-COVID, it's nice being in the room together, isn't it? And it makes a difference, I think. So I want to talk to you today about why happiness is a serious business. And I kind of embrace the word happiness now. But what you probably most know me for is the 5 ways to well-being, which was a 2008 report to the UK government foresight report. And it was a tiny project for my team at New Economics Foundation. You know, we had the idea that maybe we needed the equivalent of 5 fruit and vegetables a day, but for well-being. But we needed a place to sort of do that idea. And we were working for the Foresight project on a measurement project. I'm mainly known for measurement. And literally, as we reported, there was a table and there was a bowl of fruit in the middle. And I picked up a bit of fruit in front of the head of the Foresight report and said, well, you know, we need the equivalent of 5 fruit and vegetables a day, but for well-being. And this is a big Foresight report on mental capital and well-being, it was called. And he looked at me and he goes, all my budget's close at the end of this week, but I've got £10,000 left unspent. If you can give me a project by the weekend for less than £10,000, you can do that. So £9,600 landed on Thursday on his desk. And we had this project to create the 5 ways to well-being. What became them? So they are Connect, which is that social relationships are the key to our mental health, well-being, happiness. So it's the first one. The second one was Be Active. All of you will know that physical activity is very linked to emotional well-being. And we deliberately didn't put exercise. All of these words we tried to make very inviting. In fact, it's why I put the 3 dots afterwards, to sort of, instead of go connect, to go connect. You know, here's an invitation for you to do that. The third one was Take Notice. Quite feasibly, if we'd been doing it 5 years later, we might have said Be Mindful. But I quite like Take Notice because it's sort of, it's more active, you know. And mindfulness, you know, I think it's great. Probably a bit overexposed in some ways. And so maybe it's good it just says Take Notice. And also Take Notice is allow you to play with taking notice of your internal world and taking notice of the outside world. So in that way, I think it's quite good. The third was to keep learning. And the keep was there to remind us that it's learning throughout the whole life course. And it doesn't have to be formal learning. You know, actually quite a lot of formal learning might not be well-being inducive, you know, so it's, you know, it could be learning to, you know, a new musical instrument, or picking up your musical instrument again that you used to do as a child when you were in later life, or it could be learning a new dish or whatever like that. But learning is really, really good for us and really helps us keep mental agility and all sorts of things. And the final one was Give, which of course was quite a lot of people's favourite. And the idea that actually we feel good when we give is there absolutely in the research literature. But also it connects back to Connect. And very, very deliberately, and hopefully subtly, and hopefully a lot of you recognised it, we started and finished with the social ones. In that there is, I think, a very strong misunderstanding sometimes around well-being and happiness, that it is individual. And I'll talk about that more, but actually it's very systemic. It's very into the environment that we're in. And I think we can all recognise that. We will feel better in some environments than other environments. Of course, we bring ourselves with us, but it's a very, very social experience. And that's going to be one of the themes of my talk today and my work, which is that how we work together, and I concentrate now on the workplace, is where it's at. You know, we don't all go and do our individual work. We work with other people. And in fact, collaboration is one of the major things that we're great at as human beings. So those were the 5 ways. And as I said, it was this tiny project, £9,600, and we produced these postcards. Actually, Foresight gave us a little bit more budget when they saw them to make these. And on the day of the Foresight launch, there were these huge tomes of really, really good work on lots of things. Because a Foresight project, I don't know if you know, it's a rapid government project, getting the state of what the research is on complex things. So there have been ones on obesity, flooding, where you basically have a lot of multidisciplinary pieces of work. So well-being is not owned by one part of academia. You know, you have economists who are interested, psychologists, neuroscientists, geographers, you know, public health people. You know, there's lots and lots of people who are invested in the word well-being. So the Foresight project was to bring that all together. And everybody, you know, there was a launch, you know, probably 1,000 people, there were all these reports and then these postcards. And of course, much to the annoyance of all the academics, and we didn't do this deliberately, what did the media report on the next day, the 5 ways? Because they're easy to understand. And so, you know, you can basically put them on there. And of course, you know, we had a brief about this, which was they had to be evidence-based. So we had to have an evidence base for all of these. And they had to have universal appeal. So we were you know, not allowed to sort of be political, although I am quite political. You know, we were like being very, very neutral about it. We also had to target the individual. That was a very explicit brief from us. They did not want us saying, government needs to do this to promote well-being. It's like, what can people do in their own power to promote it? And then finally, we needed a variety, which is, I don't know if that was a design brief, but we knew that. You know, you needed a spread, so 5 gave us the option to do that. And as I said, the target the individual is important to understand that. And it's kind of why I am going to talk later about 5 ways to team happiness. And I've lifted the idea of the 5 ways, which is that they are, you know, a short list, 5. You know, they're not 10. 10 is difficult to remember. If we probably had more budget, we might have been clever and found a way of connecting the words together into, what's it called when you put but we didn't, you know, we had a rapid project to do. But targeting the individual is important because that was actually very unusual for us at Neuroeconomics Foundation. We're mainly about systemic change, how you do that, the economy. And so that just has to be aware of it. They've been picked up massively. New Zealand made them a whole part of their big public mental health campaign. You've obviously used them here. The good thing about New Zealand was they actually produced data on them about how people were using them. So this is if people did one of the 5 ways, what their well-being was, and if they did all of them. But you can see the more of them that you do, the happier people were. So the bottom is the prevalence, is actually what percentage of the people in the survey did it. You can see that the peak was to do 4 out of 5. In the paper, they also showed that the weakest effect on the way that they surveyed it. You've always had to be careful of this because you can only run analysis on the questions you have in a survey. And so the weakest was actually activity. But I think it was because they were looking to sort of, you know, they weren't looking for the optimal amount of activity. By the way they run the regressions, basically if you were doing more and more activity, they expected to have a higher well-being effect. And that isn't what we find with physical activity. It's much more getting up off the sofa and the effect of that and actually just moving your body at all. And when you look at national data on physical movement, someone like me who's not a sort of gym bunny in any way, I realize I'm in the middle of the thing. I'm not, and there's people that don't move at all. There's a lot of people that hardly move, yeah? And that's really where you see the benefit from moving to people who hardly move into getting them to move, you know, to do 5,000 steps a day, not even 10,000, to, you know, take in the physical activity wherever you are. So if you've got limited physical abilities, it's actually still movement is going to help you. So all of the 5 ways mattered, but, you know, and you was good at that. There's just been so many projects. One of the great things about doing it for the Foresight report was it wasn't a Neuroeconomics Foundation project. It was for the Government Office of Science. So the copyright sits with the Crown, which is brilliant because it means anybody can take it, they can adapt it, they haven't got to reference us, they haven't got to whatever. It's just like, here are the 5 ways. They've gone out in the world. And if you're interested in impact for your work rather than getting credit for it, because actually, you know, a lot of people will not know that I'm involved with the 5 ways to well-being. And that's fine because then it travels. And I'm very interested in how you create things that travel. I'm interested in impact ultimately. So, so they've got picked up and used a lot and adapted, and you know, there's masses and masses of them. We wrote a second report at NEF a few years later, which was basically looking at how people had used them. And although they're targeted at the individual, a lot of local authorities use them systemically. And that's interesting because that's what they were looking for. They're looking for something that they can go, actually, our projects make sense. And I think the nice thing about the 5 ways was they empowered people to do what they wanted to do anyway. You know, and actually, here's something we can go, look, we are doing this, it's promoting well-being. This is why, because we tick the boxes for these sort of things. So in that way, and I think it helped people be a bit more holistic and to think, okay, I'm doing a project on community learning, but if I put in physical activity and connection in there, I'm actually ticking lots of the boxes of the well-being, and that is really, really helpful because it's going to make the projects more motivated, more fun to be involved with, and everything like that. We also had a long list of actions, so we obviously had to condense things to make them 5 ways. So we started with the idea we wanted 5, which is like, that's not science, that's PR. Okay, let's just be honest about it. We're talking about social marketing here. So we had to squeeze things into those boxes in some senses. And the things that we had at the bottom, which didn't make the list straight away, were things like being out in nature, nutrition. There's actually stronger and stronger evidence that nutrition is involved with well-being. We're talking 15 years ago, and there wasn't so much. So, possibly. But the other thing is that government already messages on healthy eating an awful lot. So we did want to be slightly different. We did keep the be active in there because the evidence is so strong for physical well-being. Being out in nature is really good for it. But again, we messaged that underneath it. We had the words like connect, be active. And underneath it, we sort of suggested these things you could do. So we put nature. But the other one we did was we had work there, which is there's a lot of evidence that work is good for our well-being. There's evidence that if people are made unemployed, the impact on their well-being is about 4 times as high as just the loss of income. So there's a lot of other things going on there. So actually, being in work is good for people's mental health and well-being, I think is inevitable. Of course, it depends on the type of work, and we'll get to that. So in some ways, I sort of identified that there is an opportunity here. But again, one of the reasons that work didn't get in there was because it's a systemic intervention, and they specifically wanted us to do individual interventions with it. So that wasn't that part of that brief. But of course, I saw that as, well, that is an opportunity for work, to work. And, we all spend a lot of time at work, 80,000 hours over our lifetime. It's a lot of time. And so nearly everybody works. It's almost a universal experience. So if we could do interventions around well-being and latterly happiness at work, you're reaching the general population, which policymakers don't very often. I mean, okay, they tax the general population, they collect their bins, but most people get on with sort of stuff in between that. So unless you start, needing healthcare, or as you get older, of course, there are other systems that come in. But actually, the bulk of the population between 18 and 65, government doesn't have that much to do. It doesn't touch their lives that much. So, whereas work does massively. So, it struck me as an opportunity, and that's why over the last, so we started Friday Pulse as a platform in 2019, but I worked with Happiness at Work surveys for 5 years before that. So for about 10 years now, I've been working on work, and I left the policy arena in 2012, thank goodness, just before Brexit, because it was going to get even worse. But the UK government had already decided to create national indicators of well-being, which had been our campaign goal. So we felt like we'd achieved quite a lot of what we wanted to do. So I then decided I was going to set up a business and do Happiness at Work. And if I'd known how difficult it is to launch a business, I might not have done that. I certainly wouldn't have. But there you are. I'm still here doing it. And it's basically founded on the principle that a happy team is a successful team. But actually, where are we going? Oh, well, one more thing I want to say was happiness or well-being, using those words. Okay, I really embrace the word happiness now, but of course I love the word well-being. So this is a bit of work which I'm very well known for, which is called the Happy Planet Index. It's what I did my TED talk on in 2010. I did manage to put the 5 ways in there because I love them so much. But I just ask you, this was really a phenomena when it came out, so 2006. We are a small team in a think tank, a small team of 4 people in a think tank, and we produced this report, and it went global. It crashed the NEF website. It really went ballistic. But my name for it, first of all, when I first created it, was Global Sustainable Wellbeing Index. That's what I called it when I started to first do the data. And I just put it to you, I don't think it would have been nearly as successful if we called it something like that, Sustainable Wellbeing Index, or, calling it Happy Planet, is attractive. And it's just, the words, I'm interested in reach in lots of ways, reach and impact. So the word happy really reaches well. However, you can also think about it in a corporate context. Which of those job titles would you think a business wants? a chief wellbeing officer sounds serious. This is a serious thing to do. Chief happiness officer sounds frivolous, almost comical, trivial. So I think this is difficult, and so I guess most of you will operate under the term well-being, and I'm just so good about that. But I embrace happiness because I think the closer you get to people, the more engaging that word is. Yeah, it speaks to people. The emotional tone of the word speaks to people. So the more public-facing you go, and let's be honest. Happiness is I think I've got some points on this. If you think about it, there's another reason why I really like happiness. If you ask people this, how is your well-being at work? They're going to be confused. What do you mean by that? So you were saying, Biddy, it's like really difficult to create a definition or around well-being. That's because it's a very nebulous term. Yeah. Whereas if we ask people this, we can answer. Now, to me as a statistician, I'm really interested in that because that is going to give me more robust data. Because if people know what we're speaking about, you're going to get a good answer. And it's the language that we use. You could say this to a delivery driver, and you can say this to a CEO, and they're going to understand this question. And so, whereas well-being, we're always going to struggle. And we see that with the measures of well-being. They're not well-defined, they're not clearly defined. Whereas, happy we can get quite defined on it. And also, I propose this idea, which I think that happiness is a gentler way of talking about mental health at work. And if we think of those team leaders, and actually I was speaking to, I went to some friends for dinner on Saturday. She runs some sort of media company, can't remember quite what. And she's talking about one of her team who, she says, they keep saying, you're affecting my mental health at work. I don't know what to do. And I replied to her, well, just ask about how happy she is at work, because, you can talk about that, and that's something you can do about. But I think that when you talk about to team leaders about mental health, they can feel out of their depth, they don't know how to have the conversation, and it feels outside of their control. Whereas building a happy team, it's within their control and the language around it. So I like this softer, gentler way into it. And in a way, I think it's a bit like a Trojan horse, in the sense you can get people on board with this and actually you'll tackle many of the other things you want to. So that's kind of the reasons. But again, I'm really not critical of people that want to use well-being or mental health. It's just the reason why I embrace happiness. So I think work is a great context to think about well-being and happiness. It puts it in context. One of the reasons I think the Happy Planet Index was so successful was we put happiness in the context of sustainability, which is actually how I came into the whole field. My career started with quality of life and sustainability, and I moved slowly into well-being. So by putting well-being in the context of that, it suddenly made more sense. And we annoyed a lot of the international well-being researchers when we launched the Happy Planet Index, because it was the first global measure. It was before we had the World Happiness Report, which did for all of that. And they said, you're messing up because you're talking about sustainability. And I said, well, that's precisely what we're trying to do. We're trying to say that one of the things we have to look in sustainability is what's people's quality of life, their experience of life. Because we obviously can't build a world where everybody has a Mercedes and everybody has all of the economic goods they think they want. But we can build a world sustainably where people have the relationships they want to. A sustainable future is not hair shirts. I think it's dancing and music and local communities, and really quite joyful if we get it right. So, but we get rid of lots of the stuff that we don't really need. But work is a great context. When you put well-being, happiness in context, I think it becomes more powerful. If we ask people about their overall lives, it can feel quite overwhelming. Whereas you get more specific, it becomes easier to answer the questions. But there was another bit of work which really, really inspired me about it. And so this is, I think, one of the brightest minds on the planet, Daniel Kahneman, who many of you may have heard of. He won the Nobel Prize for economics, actually, even though he's a psychologist. And he wrote a very good book called Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, which is about how our cognitive behaviors. He did a lot of work on well-being too. And in 2004, he produced a report which was just so innovative. So I really started my work on well-being in 2001. Before that, I was doing quality of life. And I have to say, I was very disappointed with the measurement of well-being out there. It was a lot based around a question which is called life satisfaction, which is, if you think about your life overall, how satisfied are you nowadays? And that's just quite a dull question, you know. Satisfied, not very energetic. Is it happiness? And Daniel Kahneman produced a new idea in 2004, and it's actually not a very revolutionary idea. But he asked people what activities they did in the day, and that is basically a diary study. So he looked at this sample about how much time people spent doing stuff. His sample for this, by the way, was working women. So that's why 100% of people were working yesterday, because he did it on a weekday of working women. Okay, that was his first sample. And all the other activities is what they did. So working was the time they spent most of, nearly 7 hours. And 100% of them did them. And you can see at the bottom is what they rather discreetly called intimate relations. And 11% of them had intimate relations yesterday for an average of 12 minutes. But you can see, and this is a typical thing, we have diary studies, but then what he did, which was really interesting, was he's asked people, how much did you enjoy that activity? Okay, so an enjoyment, like happiness, is sort of like an emotional measure of quality of the experience. Okay, so then if you look at this table of activities, instead of by time taken, you look at it by enjoyment, then, you know, not surprisingly, top of the list is intimate relations. It'd be disappointing if it wasn't, wouldn't it? But right at the bottom is working and commuting. Now, this is a very simple measurement, okay, though it did take people quite a long time to do it. It took about 40 minutes to fill out the form. But he's asking people for the amount of time you did it and for the quality of that experience. It's very, very simple. And what is interesting, again, you put it in context. You bring it down to one day and you bring it down to one activities. Suddenly, that is really relatable data. I mean, yeah, who knew that so many people, is it in there? No, well, no, I've taken it out of this one, but there's one about napping, about how many people napped in the day. I didn't know that so many people took a nap in the day, but a lot of them did. You know, but, you know, you can see you know, how things fit in. We do these activities. We can see ourselves in the data. Something I'm very keen on us is we can relate to the data, because then, you know, we'll act on it. And I can literally remember where I was sitting when I read this paper. You know, it came in my inbox, someone sent it me, oh, you need to read this new paper. And I can remember having to sort of get up and walk around my think tank, and it was in 2004, and I hadn't really built a team, and I had a conversation with someone from another team, and he didn't understand what I was talking about, but he could understand my enthusiasm for what I just read. Anyway, and again, you know, it's this opportunity. There's this context. We spend a lot of time at work and we're not very happy there. So for me, I was thinking, well, if I want to reach adults about happiness, actually, maybe this is a really good context to do so. It obviously took me a decade to act on that, because it was quite a lot later. So the day reconstruction method is called, it converts feelings into data. Our feelings are information. You know, when we're unhappy, it's information to change something. When we're happy, it's kind of like, carry on, this is working for you. And obviously, our emotions are not just unhappy to happy. You know, there's all sorts of other ways they act. You know, fear is a signal there's a threat. You need to avoid it. You know, you could run away. You could freeze. You can find other people to connect with to make yourself feel safer. There are different ways of responding to it. It's a rank order of daily activities. It identifies opportunities for improvement. But the issues are, it's just one day. And also, it's really long to fill out. If you actually try to get a time series with this, I think the least favorite activity today would be filling out your day reconstruction methodology, because it'd be taking half an hour, and I guess it gets really boring. But for one-off research, it's great. So I'm very interested in how we can do that. And I'm very interested in what I call a weekly measure of happiness, asking people at the end of the week how they are. So it converts feelings into data again, but it's going to track the ups and downs of life. We're not happy all of the time. Anybody that says you can be is a snake oil salesman. And actually, it'd be dysfunctional to be happy all the time, because you need to know that signal that something needs to change. It shows also how the environment that we're in can impact our happiness. So here's a thought experiment, not a thought experiment. Just think back to that delightful year that was 2020. And how was your 2020? Yeah? It was obviously an extraordinary year. And we had lots and lots of graphs around of COVID and of all the impacts on hospitalization, on cases, on deaths and whatever. But I want to show you a graph of weekly happiness during COVID. And this is national data from the UK. And And this is how the graph goes. The roller coaster. I imagine that most of you look at that graph and go, oh, that's a bit how my year felt. Yeah, it was very, very up and down. And we can see the beginning of the year. January, February isn't the best for everybody, so it's a bit up and down. And then COVID hitting and weekly happiness falling across the UK. And that makes sense. And then we saw the recovery as we got used to being locked down, as things started to open up a bit. In the UK, we had the rather disastrous Eat Out to Help Out summer, which of course then meant we had more cases. So we got restrictions again, and we got less happy. This data comes from, I first saw it in the World Happiness Report in 2021. I don't suppose many of you are avid readers of the World Happiness Report. It's a big tome. I counted up how many graphs it had, and it had 76 graphs in it. This one was buried in chapter 7, but for me it was easily the best graph in the World Happiness Report because we can see ourselves in that data, and it's really, the 6 flowing lines are actually different types of categories of UK workers because it was put in a chapter about happiness at work. So you've got different ones. Don't worry what they are. What's I think interesting about it was that they show that we had different experiences. So although people relatively went up and down, people are going to have better and worse experiences, And I imagine that in this room, we would have done some of you, well, if you've got 6-year-olds, yours was small. Yeah.
4-year-olds.
Yeah, they're 4-year-olds. They just arrived, yeah. So, and you had children, presumably you were trying to homeschool. Yeah, trying, I say, because it was hard.
Succeeding.
Yeah, succeeding. And there were lots of different things. I very fortunately got remarried 3 years before, so I actually was locked down with someone I liked, which was quite helpful. And and I do feel, and I'd had times, I had years, where I was, half dating people because I'd been divorced for a while, and what a mess that would have been to be single. I don't know. Anyway, I felt very, very blessed. But the first dip was much more driven by fear. If you look at the data, they also collected data on people who felt fine. The second one was much more driven by boredom. Dip. So, different things impacting it. This is actually a really, really simple survey. It's called the Mood of the Nation survey. It was launched by YouGov in 2019. It's sort of something they do, I think, it's just sort of like marketing who they are. We track this data. Presumably, people can buy questions and put into the weekly surveys and find them. But they publish the data on their website, which is really great. So you can actually look at this data, right up until, last week. This is actually the trend for since their launch of the survey in 2019, right up to, I downloaded it the other day, so yesterday, I think. So you can see it's going up and down. And what you can see there is those are the lockdowns, the first lockdown and then the second one in that January. I don't know whether you'd had the same lockdowns here in Ireland, but we had it in January, February, March. And I actually found that one harder. It was winter. The weather was so nice during the first one that if you had a garden, you could at least get outside, but, But you can see the impacts of them. And of course, pandemics are rare, luckily, but they're the only thing that can have this sort of level of impact. I mean, that's a huge, huge impact on a population. I mean, I don't think you'd ever see that curve again. You can see little things like Christmas peaks. Those are the Christmas peaks. People get a bit happier at Christmas. Not everybody. Some people get unhappy at Christmas, but but on average we do. So you can see those, but they can see they're much smaller than the effect of COVID. And of course, they're just for 1 week. You can see end of summer blues. This is actually one of the least happy times of the year, as is January, February. But summer, people are happier. They're going on holiday. But you can see that consistently in the data. You can actually see hints of big events. That is Russia invading Ukraine there in the data. You can see this one, which is the combination of the Queen dying and Liz Truss's disastrous short-term government, which interestingly, so you don't know which one it was. I know which one I was more angry about. But so anyway, you can see this, but you can see they're much, much smaller. So COVID was absolutely huge, but they really are evidence that events impact us. Our happiness doesn't sit there in a sort of bubble. And the day reconstruction, I said, converts into feelings and does a rank order. What the difference with weekly measures is that it does the same. It converts feelings data, but it tracks the up and down, then it shows how the environment impacts us. I'm wondering where went my slides. Oh, yeah, so I want to say that happiness is a sign of good fit. That when we're a good fit in our environment, we feel happier. When we're a bad fit, we feel less happy. In some ways, it's a good-bad signal. And that's what I really like about the data as a statistician, because signals is what you're looking for in the data. And it shows very clearly, what's good and what's bad. But for work, this is really interesting. Because if you're a good fit in your role, you're going to be happier. And if you're a bad fit, you're going to be less happy. For whatever reasons those are. And so I want us to do a little thought experiment. Okay? I'd like you all to think of a time when you were genuinely happy at work. You're really happy at work. If you're lucky, that's now, but it might be that it's in the past. But think about what was it like, what was happening in your workplace that you really enjoyed it at that time. People just shout out something. What was really good about when you were feeling really happy at work? Working in a really good team. Yeah.
Friendships at work.
Sorry?
Friendships at work.
Friendships, having good people that you really like working with, yeah. And you can speak about non-work things, yeah?
Coffee break chats.
Sorry?
Coffee break.
Coffee break chats, yeah. Water cooler.
That's appreciated.
Feeling appreciated, yeah. Something back there.
Feeling you can make a difference.
Feeling you can make a difference, purpose, meaning, absolutely. Anything else?
Enjoying what you do.
Enjoying what you're doing, achieving things. Validation, appreciation, recognition, yeah. Sorry? Listening to each other. These are all... When you've got... Yes, creativity, absolutely. Learning is also really good. Lots and lots of things which are good about it, okay? Now I want you to think about a time when you were unhappy at work, or your least happy time. You don't have to be unhappy. Unhappy can sound a bit comical too. When you were least happy at work, we're all old enough to have had a few jobs now, and some of them will be less good. I don't want you to tell me about that, but I just want you to think. I just want you to think about your motivation to do a good work. Okay, I would hazard a guess that everyone felt more motivated to do good work when they were happy at work than when they were unhappy at work. Okay, it's just obvious, isn't it? But now I want you to think about something else, which is in between. Because it's not either unhappy or happy, but I think there's a lot of time when we can get where we just feel okay at work. And what's interesting about okay is, one is, I don't think okay is okay. It's a softer sort of, this isn't okay, when we say we're okay. But the other is there's no burning signal to change anything. When you're unhappy, you do get off your ass and go and do something and change something because it's unpleasant. But when you're okay is where you can get stuck in life. And so actually okay is really quite dangerous in some ways because, unhappy, well, okay, you've got to do something to change because it's there. Whereas okay, and a lot of people can get quite stuck in okay jobs. They're not bad enough to leave. Maybe they've got enough friendships and things. So there are things that are okay in it, but they're not great. And so that's also kind of interesting. And happiness is also good for employers. It's not only good for the employee, and it can solve two really, really major pain points for employers. So a lot of you, well, we all work, don't we? And a lot of you might work with employers, you might work in organizations. And these are, in my experience, the two biggest pain points, which is, is productivity and staff turnover. And low productivity growth is a problem across the UK economy, a problem for a lot of things. Staff turnover really hurts people. They, really, really experience it. And the interesting thing about employee happiness is it's going to have a positive impact on both of these variables and how they interact. And so I was saying to a few people that I've created, I'm working on a book at the moment, which is called Happiness as Serious Business. And I wanted to be able to capture the value that happy employees add. So I've created a new metric for this, and you can tell me whether you think this works. But I want to talk about the typical value that an employee adds over time, over their time with an organization. So I'm going to have an axis here for time, and I'm going to have another axis up here for the value they add over that time to the organization. And when you recruit somebody, there's upfront costs, and it's going to take some time for them, once they've bedded in, for them to repay those. So it's a curve that basically looks something like this, which is that in the months prior to them joining, there is a cost, so it's dipping below the value added, and then once they join, they start adding value. There's a lot of things in there. There's the cost of the recruitment process, there's the cost of onboarding, training, there's the fact it takes people time to get up to speed, and all of those will affect where the line crosses where's your break-even point. But by my calculation, typically for an average person in the UK, it's about after a year of employment. It depends. If you're in hospitality, just got much higher turnover, a lower barrier to entry, you can be up to speed quite quickly. But if you're in some more complex job, it's going to take you longer. The recruitment's going to cost you more. So basically, it's somewhere around that, yeah? And that's, and if you speak to corporates, they're quite aware of this, that, they need to keep people, they need to recruit them. But if happiness is a sign of good fit, we're going to have different curves for different types of people. So this is sort of the average person, but the happy employee is going to be adding more value all of the time than the unhappy one. And so they get to the break-even point earlier because they get into their work, they'll be enthusiastic, they'll be better at it straight away, and they'll add more value. And the unhappy person is going to do the opposite. But the kicker is that's the sort of add to productivity. And this is a schematic, but from my data, the gap between the happy and the unhappy is between 20 and 30% on productivity. So it's not double, the happy aren't twice as productive, but there's a sort of 20 to 30% gap there. That's how I've drawn it here. But the kicker is that average tenure in the UK is about 5 years. Public sector is much longer. This is a median figure, not a mean. A mean is where does the 50% person, because some people have been in their jobs 25 years. It's not that that's 25 times more important than someone who's been there 1 year, so you use the median to get to the middle person. So that's average tenure, but happiness affects tenure, because clearly when you're unhappy, you're going to leave. So when you start doing the stats, so this is basically, this would be saying that if everyone stayed average tenure, you'd have a higher value from the happy person. But if you start including tenure, then you've got this curve for the average person that looks like this. An average OK employee stays 5 years, adds this amount of value. But you plot the same graph for someone who's happier and therefore stays longer, then it looks like this. Oh, I'm going to call that 1, by the way. This is for the happy employee. And basically what you can see is they're staying 8 years. Oh, that's a bit annoying. They're staying 8 years instead of 5 years. So they're adding value over a lot longer period of time. I hope if I just, sorry about that. So you're going to have this factor. You're going to have the happy employee does this. They stay 8 years. 8 years. So basically, that's a 40% reduction in staff turnover. Is that what that represents? And the unhappy employee is only going to stay 2 years, and they're going to deliver hardly any value. So the happy employee is going to deliver about 2.5 times more value over their lifetime than the OK employee. And the OK employee is much better than the unhappy one. They're delivering 5 times as much value. So there's a really, really strong business case here for worrying about it, for thinking about happiness, because you're going to have more loyal staff, they're going to be more productive, and they're going to help solve 2 of your big pain points. So we're really working, this is one of the reasons I love happiness at work, we're working with a win-win situation. It's an alignment here to go on. And it's a very, very big effect. And I have done all the stats behind it, and the one basically represents about £100,000 of value that over that 5-year period that someone adds, 250,000, 20,000. But they're quite boring when you do all the stats, because you have to have values for what's the average wage, what's the full cost of employment, what's the cost of recruitment, and whatever like that. But I have crunched the numbers behind it. But I think this is still an underestimate, which is actually the even startling thing, because we're using the individual as the unit of measurement here. And the issue is that happiness is contagious, which is, and unhappiness is. This is the sort of radiators and drains theory, which is that some people radiate positivity and they make us feel great, and some people suck the life out of us. So if you've got someone that's unhappy at work, they are costing you in terms of how they impact with other people. So I think it's actually even an underestimate. And positivity resonates between people. So there's this great researcher called Barbara Fredrickson, who you might have heard of, who created the broaden and build theory of positive emotions. And she talks about the micro moments of positivity resonance. That when we smile at somebody, something warms, when we have open body posture rather than closed. All these things impact how we feel in the moment. And these dynamics are going on all of the time. All of the time. So, and so this is the systemic effect that we're going to get from happiness, well-being in the workplace. And again, it's this bit that I try to emphasize in the 5 ways, that happiness and well-being is experienced within us, but it is also experienced between us. It's between us. It's interpersonal. In fact, Daniel Kahneman, there's a quote by Daniel Kahneman which he goes, happiness is almost a social emotion. So we talk about social emotions as, shame and guilt and disgust and things, social disgust and things like that. But happiness is too. It's like we feel better in the company of other people, and that works, by the way, for introverts and extroverts. Introverts, although they do like time on their own, whatever, they don't actually want to be isolated. They just want to be more discriminating with their relationships. You can say whatever you want to say about it, but it's like and this is of course this is an issue from work from home and things like that starts coming out. How we need people around us. So it's these social things that are going on, and our brains are hardwired to be social. And I want to use the idea of primates to show this. So this is a band of chimps, and they are engaged in a social activity, which is that they're grooming in the good sense each other. They are picking fleas out of them, and they do this much more than they need to just for hygiene. And we still have this pleasure signal in us, right? If you think about strokes, right? If you stroke somebody, or you're stroked by somebody, and obviously there's safety issues here, but if you do, then it's very pleasant. What's really, really interesting is it's only pleasant at about 2 centimeters per second, the travel of the stroke. If you stroke too fast, it's not pleasant. If you stroke too slowly, it's creepy. If it's 2 centimeters a second. So a mother does this. You see a mother just stroking their child's hair. What's going on there? Well, at the bottom of every hair follicle is a T receptor. If it's passed at 2 centimeters per second, it releases endorphins, and endorphins are pleasurable. So when you are stroking somebody or being stroked, you have got a release of endorphins going in there. And chimps have this the same. It's that they're building relationships. By their grooming, that's the only word I can use, but they are building friendships. Okay, and we do the same. So they are very social chimps. They tend to go around in bands of 50 or so chimps together. They have a hierarchy in there, but they're very supported, they're very playful. They also can be aggressive. Chimps are aggressive, yeah? And if you were, our natural habitat is not the modern workplace. It is a band of hunter-gatherers. That's how we've evolved to live. And if you were in a band of hunter-gatherers and you got separated from your band and you came across an angry chimp, the chimp would win. Its jaws are about 4 times as strong as us. It can run at 25 miles an hour. We can only run at 18. They are a lot stronger. If you met an angry chimp, it would rip you apart. End of story, okay? However, if you were in a band of humans and you met a band of chimps, the humans would win every time because we collaborate better than them. We would work together as a team better than them. We would do something like, one of us would light a fire to distract us, others would get we wouldn't have a rope, but we get something that we could sort of try and gather them together. Humans would win and did win. Through our evolutionary past, humans are the most successful species. We're what ecologists call an over-successful species now because we're starting to damage our environment because we've become so successful. But collaboration, is our, or building relationships is our superpower. This is what humans are best at, is collaborating, building relationships. And the brains I'm showing you here, chimp brain on the left and the human brain on the right, this is the social brain hypothesis, that the reason that we have a very large neocortex is to manage the complexity of human relationships. And we solve problems together. That's what we do as a species. We collaborate, We solve problems together. That is the same in our workplaces today, in our lives today, as it is in our evolutionary past. That is what we are amazing. And we've got this very large, and what the research on this is called Robin Dunbar. You may have heard of him, called the Dunbar number. He basically looked at the ratio of the neocortex to the rest of the brain and worked out that it wasn't the size of the brain, because obviously blue whales have much bigger brains than us, but they have much larger bodies to manage, and there's a lot of brain functioning about managing our bodies, but it's the ratio of the neocortex to the rest of the brain, and the human ratio is about 75, 80%, the chimps is about 60%, and that difference is our ability to manage relationships and the complexity of them. And I would actually say that human relationships are the most complex thing in the universe. So you might think that black holes are, or quantum physics is. And they're strange and weird, but actually they're highly predictable. Human relationships are never highly predictable. So they are actually very difficult to manage. And I would hazard a guess that, although they're wonderful, I would hazard a guess that for nearly everybody in this room, your most painful experience in life has been relational. You know, relationships are difficult. They are not easy. Of course, they're great when they go well, but they're not easy. And relationships are the heart of our happiness and well-being. So this is a diagram from Robin Dunbar. He talks about there being different levels of intimacy. So we have maybe an intimate partner, then we have very close friends. He calls them best friends, good friends. Don't really worry about his language. But we tend to have, you know, one or two. If you're lucky, it's your romantic partner is one of those one or two. Hopefully it is, you know, and maybe another bestie, you know, and then we have very close friends and whatever. What defines these friends? What defines these friends is time. Is that this graph is from him, which is the amount of time, contacts per day with these different friendship groups. And our very closest friends, we are talking to every 2 or 3 days. And you know, different friends, it's maybe once every couple of 3 weeks you'd contact with them. And then acquaintances, it's just, you know, it's once a year or something where you send a Christmas card to them. No, we don't do that so much, but, you know, but you might follow them on Facebook. But we've got these different levels of friendships. And, you know, if you meet somebody new and you want to be their friend, you've both got to decide to make time for each other. And that's hard. It's hard to make a new friend when we're older because have we got the time, you know, to do that? So time becomes really, really important. And we work better together. I don't know why I said that slide there. Well, okay, so I'm going to say that teams, basically, because we work better together and we spend a lot of time in our teams, that teams are going to be the most crucial locus, context for our happiness at work. And what I want to say is that I think, and this is the thing where happiness and performance go together, is a great team is happy and high performing. They need to be both of those two things, okay? So what I'm looking to do in my work is how do you create great teams that are happy and high performing? And we all know these teams, or hopefully we don't, but miserable teams, nobody wants to be in those, yeah? Now the correlation between happiness and success is strong, but it's not one. It's not totally, so there's other factors in there. So you can have teams in these other diagonals, and so I call them slacking teams, where they're happy and low performing, and burning out teams where they're unhappy and high performing. And we do find teams in our data in these quadrants. And if I go to senior leaders and they're like, oh, happiness, that's ridiculous, this is what they're worried about. They're worried about slacking teams. They are worried that if they try and build team happiness, everyone's just going to be like happy and not really working. Yeah? And what I actually find in their data is that their problem is much more down here. Oh, sorry. So it's much more down here in the burning out teams. They have probably 3 or 4 times as many burning out teams as they do slacking. They probably have 5 or 6. If your teams are happy, probably 5 or 6 times more in the great teams than in the slacky. So there are options of these to be, but you shouldn't be too worried about slacking teams. And if you are, it's actually not a problem of happiness, is it? It's a problem of work focus, of actually how you're driving your other KPIs in your business. So I don't really feel it's my problem to solve for you. One of the things I can help you with in the slacking team is making sure that as you increase performance, you don't push them down into burning out teams, which is really possible. So really, what my aim of my work is to move people into this quadrant. And naturally, you will help them with their well-being and their mental health at work if you start doing that, because it's great to be in a great team. People say achieving, good relationships, creativity. That's great. It's great for us to be in these teams, you know. And actually, it's not as great to be in a slacking one, because you kind of know you're slacking when you're in that quadrant. So I have a model which I call the dynamic model of team happiness, and happy teams are at the core of it. And what I'm interested in is what are the successes of them. So I've already talked about a couple of them, but these are the 7 successes I've identified and got data for and evidence showing that happier teams are good. They're better at collaboration. I'm going to go in a bit more detail about that in a minute. They're more creative, they've got higher retention rates, they attract other people to them, they have less sickness, less burnout, higher productivity, and actually organizations have higher share price growth and higher profitability. Happiness leads to these things, but I've drawn another arrow back there because success leads to happiness too. And the reason it's a dotted arrow is that the causal pathway from happiness to success is twice as strong as from success to happiness. So they both exist, but actually happiness leads more to success. And so here you get into a virtuous cycle. Happiness leading to success, leading to happiness. Watch out, there's a vicious cycle there too. You know, poor performance leads to unhappiness, leads to more poor performance. So you can get caught in these sort of loops here. But they're moving around very, very dynamically. The energy is moving around there a lot. And you also have the drivers at the other end of the model. You have the things, well, what leads to happy teams? And this is where I've used the language of the 5 ways before. Now, you're a rare audience for me because you're very familiar with the original 5 ways. So, but they are slightly different because they are talking about being systematic. Okay, and they're still connected. It's still going to be the same one to begin with. But then you're in a system, so it's being treated fairly in the system is really, really important. Being empowered to do your work, being challenged, being inspired. Actually, a lot of the things that you guys said when we said about what was happy, they're all in there. And again, this is, it's a dynamic space. There's feedback the other way. Happy teams are going to find it easier to build relationships. I remember once doing a workshop on fairness, and someone said it's much easier to be fair to people you like than people you don't like. I don't know whether that's true, but it always struck me as an interesting observation. So these things are going to build on each other, but what you're trying to do is, at the core of it, is build great team experiences for people. Oh, by the way, great team experiences. I think that instead of a chief happiness officer, you should have a chief team experience officer. Because I think it's ultimately about team experience. And a lot of employee experience people out there. I think team experience is a better word than employee experience because it immediately puts the emphasis on where it's going to be experienced. So they're very, very dynamic. So just very, very quickly, I'm not going to go into the data very much into these, but this is the sort of data. Happy teams are twice as likely to collaborate with other teams. People in a positive mood are more than 4 times more likely to create an innovative solution. Everyday creativity, problem solving is very related to positive mood. When you're in a negative mood, you can't think broadly. Unhappy employees are 3 times as likely to leave next quarter. So when you track the data, you can see that unhappiness drives staff turnover quickly. That's where I got the thing about why they only stay 2 years, is that sort of data. Attracting talent, a lot of the way that organizations attract talent is by personal recommendation. There's an indicator called Employee Net Promoter Score. How much would you recommend this company? That it's almost perfectly correlated with happiness, by the way. Happy employees obviously recommend you, unhappy ones don't, yeah? It's a useless question, by the way, I think, for employee experience because you're asking the organization's agenda. Will you recommend us? Whereas actually what you should be saying is, how are you? So I think it's not a good one to use for that, although it does pick up the signal. Unhappy employees have twice as many sick days. They're more than likely to get burnt out. And happy teams are over 20% more productive, which was the data for the difference between the unhappy and the happy, which I did 10% each there. And then share prices, which is larger organizations that have good cultures as measured by things like the Great Place to Work list. Also, there's a new one, which is Indeed.com, has started tracking the happiness of people as they're changing jobs, and they do an indicator of how happy employees are. They find the same effect, which is that organizations with higher levels of happiness, higher levels of staff satisfaction are going to have better share price growth. That is actually a great indicator because you've got all the costs of doing that involved in that indicator too. So often when we look at things alone, you could promote happiness, it can promote productivity, but if the cost of intervention is higher than the benefit, you haven't got it, whereas with share price, you've got it all in there, and profitability. So they're all different good indicators. The successes are interconnected. So, you know, and I'm going to look at a study now that links sales and collaboration. So it's going to look particularly at collaboration, a bit about creativity, and ultimately about higher productivity. These things are interconnected. And it's sales, and it's actually in BT call centres. It's a study by, I think it was led by Jean Emmanuel Denis. He's the one I know most out of these three. He's at Oxford University. He has the Centre for Wellbeing Policy, I think, there. Anyway, and they persuaded BT to let them track the happiness of a lot of call operators. These were spread across different call centres across the UK. They had over 1,500, and they measured their happiness weekly. That's why I like the study very much, because they've got a really responsive indicator. And they measured their sales. Now, these people are on the phone. They are actually not working in a team in any way. They are working on their own, and I think call centres are sort of kind of the modern sweatshop in some ways. You know, they've got very, very strong indicators on it. They have their performance and everything, so they're very, very monitored. In this survey, 90% of these calls were inbound. So this is not sales teams who are going and making their own leads and things like that. So, by the way, this is great for studies. I'm not saying it's great jobs, but because you've got no interpersonal, you know, connection between things, so it makes it much easier to study. No teamwork, which, as I said. And so what they did was they asked them every week, how happy were you this week? And then they tracked that to sales. And what they found was that the happier sales operators were selling about 13% more than the unhappy. This is actually a really small effect size in data on the impact between productivity and sales, because there is no teamwork, because their job is very, very limited. You know, you're taking a call, you're making a sale or not on it, and it's still got this impact. Okay, so it's really, really limited work, but you've still got this impact, and it's significant. I mean, actually, if BT pushed more people to being happier at work, I worked out they'd make £1 million more a week. I don't know whether that would actually come to play, but that's what it looked like. And so that was a difference between operators. This is a difference within operators. Because they were tracking it every week, people would some weeks be happier and other weeks be less happy. So you had the same effect tracking the same people through time. This is a stronger result because it's saying changes in my happiness level will impact my productivity. So this is where they start getting into the causal bit of it, because they're tracking it. So that's really, really interesting. And then, so if they came happier, they sold more. But then they wanted to prove causality, and this has been really, but they used the British weather. It's really interesting. It's like how lovely that the miserable British weather can prove causality. But because they had these call centres across the UK, they were experiencing different weather on the same days. And they could start to look at how much the weather impacted people's happiness and therefore how much it impacted their sales. And what they found was that in sunnier weeks, call operators were happier. I'm sure it's the same in Ireland, isn't it? You know, when you live in this part of the world and it's wet, it's good when the sun shines. And so and they also sold more in those weeks. And so what they basically showed, the sunshine made people happier, led to more sales. That is a causal link, because you can do more sales and become happier. That's possible. That's the cycle. That's the virtuous cycle. But however happy I am, I don't make the sunshine. So the causal path cannot go the other way. And this is the first academic paper to absolutely nail down causality. Okay, there's lots and lots of correlational that suggest it. There's lots that are correlational through time, which I think of as almost proof, but it's still technically not. But this really nails it. And the limitation of the study actually really helped with that. They even had the fact about how many windows are in the different types of offices, because some had glass, some were almost like a warehouse with none. Obviously, the warehouse with no windows is a worse place to work, okay? But it meant the weather didn't affect their sales as much as the ones with glass. It was still better to be in the glass ones even when the weather was miserable, but basically they could even do that. So it was really, really, really good study. Now, the thing with that is it still doesn't actually explain why people were happier, why they were selling more. But they get into this question too, okay, which is that they looked at they found first out the happier operators did three things more. They fulfilled their schedules more completely, they worked a bit faster, and they had a better conversion rate, better quality calls and things. The only one of those that reliably related into more sales was the last one. So if you complete your schedule more completely and you work faster, but you're still rubbish at selling, you're still not selling much, yeah? Whereas it's the last one that really, really matters. And then they looked at the types of calls they were making, and they basically identified that there were three types of calls. There was a simple order taking. Someone's ringing, they want to do an order. The next one was that there was the contracts that had to be a bit more complicated. And the third one was that they were dealing with upgrades and recontracting, often with unhappy customers, the most difficult types is. And if you notice, there is a rising complexity to those calls. And when they crunched the numbers for that, they found that the routine calls, there was absolutely no impact of happiness on the sales of them. People, they know what they're coming for, they're just doing it, tick, thank you. The contracts, there was impact. It was right on the edge of statistical significance. The negotiated, there was a strong relationship. And what this means is that when we're more positive, we're better with dealing with complexity. We're better at collaborating. You think of the person on the call and they are talking to an unhappy customer, they've got to basically put themselves in their minds, see it from their perspective. What's the problem they've got? How can I solve this with you? They are collaborating with the customer, with the client on the call. This is our superpower in action. When we are happier, we are better at collaborating. We are better at finding creative solutions to it, and we will sell more. And I think that is really, really interesting. That is the positivity resonating. And the great thing about working in work is you've got all these really tight outcome indicators you can work with. Did they make a sale or not? That's like really measurable, and you can see the impact. In our own lives, positivity resonance happens or doesn't happen in our marriages, in our relationship with our kids, but it's less easy to see the outcomes because we don't have outcome variables. We don't think about measuring our family quality all of the time and things like that. But if you do long-term studies of relationships, and they've done these where they've basically had couples come in where they've had to talk about something that goes well for them and then talk about something that's difficult for them. The couples that were able to positively negotiate difficulties in their relationship were much more likely still to be together 10 years later than the ones that couldn't. And they could tell it from that half-an-hour interview. You know, they could predict who was going to stay together and who not. Obviously not 100%, but you're working with it. So this really, really matters. And it's why I get very, very interested in team happiness and how dynamic it is. It's this very, very fluid space. And if you think about the 5 ways to happiness, connect, be fair, these are really constructs that we're familiar with in the psychology literature. Connect is about relatedness, relationships, how important they are. Fairness is about justice. You know, we know that people are happier in fair systems. Empower is just another word for autonomy. Challenge is about development, or Daniel Pink would call it mastery in his Drive, in his book Drive. And inspire is about meaning and purpose. You know, these are things that we know. The only thing that we've really done with them is we frame them in easier to understand words, ones that managers can pick up, they're positive actions. So really the tricks that I did with the 5 ways to well-being original is you're trying to put things which are attractive to do and easy to do and invite people into that space. And to do it in a way. And so when we do this in organizations, and I do it, you know, I have a questionnaire that starts trying to operationalize these to see how you're doing it. You know, I'm a statistician, so for the Connect one, we ask people about their team relationships, we ask them about friendships, we ask them about team cooperation. So the relationships. For the Be Fair, someone talked about being respected, or, you know, fairness and respect, feeling appreciated, someone said. Work-life balance is another important thing, you know, if there's too much spillover into your own private life. It's actually a really leading indicator for staff turnover, in that people can have a bad work-life balance and really enjoy their work. Still means they're more likely to leave in about a year's time because they're going to get pressure from outside to sort that out too. Empower is about using your strengths, the things that you're good at and you love actually. Freedom to be yourself, influence decisions. These are really important things. Challenge is about creativity. Getting good feedback that's actually helpful, learning new things. And inspire is about being proud of what the organization does so that the work's worthwhile. I can send a PDF of all of these slides, by the way, if you want. Accomplishment. So, it's there. So you basically, you start creating a questionnaire around operationalizing those drivers. Really, really important statistically, by the way, to keep drivers and outcomes differently. Have a clear indicator of drivers and a clear one of outcomes. It's actually why I hate the Gallup Q12, which is that they're just a set of drivers. They're saying these 12 things, if you know them, the engagement surveys for Gallup, there are 12 things in their questionnaire, and they're just drivers. So they say, if you do one on these, that you've got a more engaged population. Well, have you? Every bit of statistical analysis I've ever done, drivers have different weights. They're not all equal, and they change within contexts. The weights will change in different contexts. So you really, really need to keep them separate, and we do that. So if you want to do this questionnaire, there's a free version on this website, which is for individuals. So you can go to friday1.com, and it takes 5 minutes to do the questionnaire, and then you get a PDF report about your happiness at work. So it's like those 16 personalities ones that you might have seen on the web, where you get a report on who you are, as if we didn't know, but anyway. But this is about your specific work context, yeah, and what you can do about it. And it forms the sort of core of some of our work at Friday Pulse. So relationships really matter at work. They're really, really important. And then this is quite a shocking result that's come out recently, but the individually based interventions on well-being have really quite small impacts or no impacts. And so this is it's still a working paper by a guy called William Fleming, who's at Oxford. Have you seen this paper? Yeah. You could critique it if you want to, because I'm not. I don't know. So because I'm 80% convinced with his analysis. But basically what he looks at is the British Healthiest Workplace survey. And there's 28,000 employees in this across 140 organisations. They are opt-in organisations, by the way. So this is not a representative sample of the UK. It's organisations that are already interested in this. Actually, the employees that are asked, and I think they're opt-in too. But what they're basically looking at is what was the impact of employee well-being of these different interventions. They used the Warwick Edinburgh Mental Wellbeing Scale, which is a scale I really like. If any of you are using a wellbeing scale, I think this is a really good one. It's got functionality in there. It's got how you can make decisions, things as well as how you feel. So I think it's a very good scale. It's not as simple as my weekly measure, but I like it as a scale. So what they did was they basically looked at the different interventions that people made. So they had resilience training, mindfulness, relaxation, coaching, time management, financial well-being, volunteering, there's a well-being app, other coaching, sleep apps, sleep events, whatever that is, I don't know. Anyway, and then looking at the effects on the WEM. So I'm going to put a line there. That would be no effect. If you're to the left of that, you're having a negative impact. If you're to the right of it, you're having a positive impact. And then I'm going to put some of these on top of it. And these are, the X in the middle is going to what the average impact is, and the whiskers, they're called, that go out, show the 95, I think, % confidence intervals of where that is. Okay, so I'm going to put these up on the thing. And what you'll see is that the whiskers are cutting the line for nearly all of them, which means that we haven't got statistically significant results about the impact of these. You'll also see, rather disturbingly, that some of the X's are to the left, which means they might even be having a negative impact on people's well-being. And the only one with a positive is volunteering, which is kind of interesting because it's taking people out of the work context, putting them in a social environment that is purposeful, and it has an impact on it. So notice it's social, it's purposeful, has an impact. This one here, resilience training, has a negative impact. And we're in the workplace here, so let's imagine it, right? You've got a really difficult workplace, and they send you on an individual resilience training so that you can absorb their rubbish, and actually, there is a way that actually this is a bit of the tip of an iceberg of almost a scandal, actually, which is that something came out of Penn University called the Penn Resilience Program. It was basically aimed at children in schools, building resilience for them. It sounds great. Angela Duckworth wrote a best-selling book on it called Grit. And they put the Penn Resilience Program into the US Army, and they want to do military mental fitness, basically showing them, helping these US Army people in combat situations with their mental resilience. And what they found was that they wasted hundreds of millions of dollars on this, had absolutely no impact. As soon as it went voluntary, nobody wanted to go to it because they didn't like it. And I think it's this, it's this sort of fact that it's like it's your problem. It's your resilience that's the problem here. Bruce Daisley, in a book called Fortitude, does a wonderful unpicking of this and very funny of it. But so what we get out of this paper is that resilience training might be counterproductive, but very, very strong indication that well-being is social and systemic. And that is where I think we should put interventions. Being social and systemic is where I think the interventions for mental health, well-being, 5 minutes, okay, yeah. So leading the team is very difficult. That's just going there. Time spent. So the currency of relationships, time is the currency of relationships. And it's going to get really into a critical issue here, which is that leading happy and successful teams takes time. And trust takes time to build. And everybody is under pressure, time pressure. And work can feel a bit like this, I think. It's a charioteer with two horses pulling in two directions. One is team productivity, the other is team happiness and well-being, or it can be our personal, whatever. We feel pulled in two different directions. And in this world, time is money. In the world of well-being, time is the currency of relationships. You've got a direct clash here. This is the coalface of well-being and happiness at work, is time. And there's a lot of unpaid overtime in the UK. Managers are working 6.5 hours extra, directors 11, IT workers 4, doctors 5, teachers 10, nurses 2. There's a lot of unpaid overtime going on. Unpaid overtime is clearly a bargain for the employer, or seems to be anyway, but actually you're not going to get your best work out of people working that long hours. But to be fair, long hours isn't increasing in the UK. The long-term time trend is down. 100 years ago we used to work 3,000 hours a year. We now work 1,700 hours a year. So there's some positives on that. But what really is increasing is intensity, always being on. This is a graph of intensity of work and how fast work is. So people are feeling under more pressure. That's for certain. If you're feeling stressed at work, you can take the 5 ways and think about them. Actually, you can think about connecting, particularly the first 3, being active, taking notice, and basically that's just saying take a break, go for a walk, chat to somebody if you're feeling stressed. Mindful breathing even is going to help you do that. So there are individual things you can do about it. But the main thing is that leadership really, really matters at work, and team leadership. And you were talking about this. You were talking about this. This is where it's at. And Google asked themselves, what are the qualities to build a great team? And they created a project called The Oxygen, and they found 10 key attributes. I'm just going to go through them a bit quickly, but they're a good coach, they empower their team, they create an inclusive team environment, they're productive and results orientated, they're a good communicator, they support career development, they have a clear vision for the team, and I got a force quit. What happens if I just go there? Let's see. Technical skills. Okay, what I'm going to put to you here is that you look at those, and those are people skills. They're mainly people skills, yeah? And of course, team leaders are very unsupported with their we're getting there, sorry. This is the two major challenges for team leaders, which is that they have a lack of training in people skills, and they have a lack of time. And those two things coming together are where this point is. This is the difficult point. The lack of training is astonishing. So I was just looking at some data this week from the labour force survey in the UK. 83% of managers say they've had no training in the last 12 months. The UK Chartered Management Institute say that 80% of managers are what they call accidental managers. They're promoted for technical or length of service, not for people skills. This is a real problem. And so I designed something, because I'm the designer and stuff, is how do you build the foundations of a happy, successful team in just 30 minutes a week? Because they haven't got the time and they haven't got the training. So can you create something that really helps them do this, okay? And I call it measure, meet, repeat, which is that every week, measure how the team is, meet together and talk about those results, repeat the cycle. And it's basically how you have micro conversations that build that positivity resonance in your teams. How can you do that? So I created this platform which does this. It has 2 cadences, the weekly check-in and the quarterly check-up. So check-in's like checking the fuel tank. Check-up is checking under the bonnet and giving an MOT. So they're doing that. The fast cycle is you measure, you ask people how happy they were, and they answer on a scale like this. So you've got some data on how your team is, and you'll see a time trend immediately. At a team level, organizational level, it all breaks down, so you can see what's going on immediately. That's the good bit, bad signal. Very typical that, you know, you have these dips, come back. That's resilience in action. That's a positive if you come back quickly from a setback. Everyone's going to have setbacks. You then have to have a meeting and talk about that. And of course, it's got to be brief because people haven't got the time. So what I suggest is that team leaders have a weekly meeting with their team, and they basically find out how everyone's doing. I mean, you can use the measure part of it, but you can do this in your teams anyway. Ask people what's going well for them. Too much, there's not enough appreciation. There's not enough celebrating what's going well in organizations. Always too much onto the next challenge, which is just draining and things. You know, there are positives going on, presumably, you know, celebrate them. Understand and tackle any frustrations quickly. That's friction. You know, the positives are flow. You know, friction and flow is an engineering idea about how do you create fluid dynamics to work well. Well, it's the same in teams. Get rid of the pain points, build on the positive ones. And because people are really time pressured, we produce a slide deck for team leaders every week with their results. I think of it as a bit like HelloFresh or one of those meal boxes that you can get, open it up and your meal is in there. You know, here, this is your meeting is in this box. Open it up, here you are, talk about these things. It's going to help your team have a better atmosphere. And then you repeat, and it builds. This is real data from a real guy who was appointed as team leader of a really team that was deeply unhappy on the left. And over 6 months it took him to build the positivity in his team. Trust doesn't come straight away. You know, these things take time. But you can see he's up into the right zone, which is mainly in the green, sometimes in the yellow, you know, the team. And so it takes time. We then have a slower quarterly drive, which is the checkup cycle. Same measure, meet, repeat. Same idea. So this is the questionnaire that you can do on Friday 1. And we produce data for them. And we send back to the team leaders as well as to the organizational leads, you know, but, you know, stuff that you say, well, you know, here are your results. What surprises you? What interests you? Yeah? What are the positives? What are your challenges? You know, brainstorm some ideas. Take some time. Take a couple of hours every quarter to think about what's going on in your team. You'll create a healthy, functional, happy team this way. And yeah, so just to summarize what I've done, I talked about how happiness is very, very dynamic. Happy employees add 2.5 times more value than okay employees. There's a really strong business case for this. It's contagious, which is going to mean that teams really matter. Great teams need to be happy and successful, otherwise they're going to go out of business. The burning out teams are going to drive people out of the business. Dynamic model of happiness, but team happiness. The 7 successes of happy teams. You know, there's lots of good things in there. It helps us deal with complexity. Positivity helps us deal with complexity. 5 ways to team happiness. You can do that at friday1.com. Time pressure is very, very real. Very, very real. Biggest pushback you're going to get about anything is I haven't got the time. Look after yourself if you're stressed. You know, that's personal advice. People skills are essential skills. They're not soft skills. They're not voluntary skills. These are our essential skills for team leadership. And Friday Pulse can help you build happy teams in just 30 minutes a week. Find out more, follow me, connect with me on LinkedIn. That's where I post. I don't do X, Twitter. I don't do that. I rather reluctantly do LinkedIn. I'm starting to embrace it. But very easy to find because I don't spell Nick with a K. So a stupid thing from my school days actually makes me more findable. You can reflect on your own happiness at work at friday1.com. It's free. We've got resources at fridaypulse.com. We've got an ebook, other things you can do there. You can sign up to use Friday Pulse in your team. It's free for individual teams. And for organizations, it's obviously paid for. And my email, if you want me, is nick@fridaypulse.com. Thank you very much indeed.